Hi, everyone. All right. Hopefully you can see the agenda. So first thing I want to walk you through is very quick what we're going to talk about today. So I'll quickly start. Not on the agenda. We'll quickly show a polling app that we built using UiPath Apps. So you'll all get to have a little survey there. But we'll start the meat of the presentation with what is apps from the very core. So if you've never interacted with apps before, that's totally okay. This is a great place for you. We'll also talk about identifying apps use cases. So that's a big question that I know a lot of clients come to me with is, what's a good use case for apps? And there's hundreds. So how do you identify those within your organization? And from there, I'm going to hand it off to David Kroll from Ashling Partners, and he's going to share an amazing app creation framework to help you turn your ideas into robust applications. And he's also going to show you a care management application that Ashling has built. And with that, we'll move on to some best practices and a live Q&A. So with that in mind, I do want to quickly give everyone the opportunity to scan this QR code, or let me pass this bit.ly into the chat if you just want to access this on your computer. So this is a UiPath app. It's built using UiPath's public-facing capabilities, meaning that though this was built using our internal tenant at UiPath, everyone will be able to access this through this link or this QR code. So this is a very simple example to showcase a very powerful capability. If you saw the Forward 5 demo, we built a public-facing app to help job candidates with pre-boarding. So all of the steps that somebody needs to complete before they even become an employee. With public-facing apps, you can start gaining value from automating processes that involve external users and stakeholders. So at the end of the session, we're going to send you a link to download a package that includes a template for this polling app, and also an app that you'll see in a couple of minutes to show the poll results. It also includes a setup guide with some very thorough documentation. But the guide is intended to not only help you set up this app, it's to help you generally understand how to use data service and apps. So the guide's going to go over specifics on setting up public-facing apps versus internal ones, and it's going to set you up to create higher value experiences. So with that, I'm actually going to refresh my poll results and see what everybody has answered. All right, let's have a look here. So we have a majority of people who haven't used apps, totally okay. A good amount of people who have been using apps for less than a year, so a little bit of experience, and 16 people who have been using apps for over a year. So that's some pretty good engagement there. I love to see it. This is a great place for all of you, regardless of your experience level. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. It collaborates with me. Perfect. All right. So let's start with the very basics. What is UiPath Apps and how can it add to your automation journey? Apps is our low-code application builder, so you can use it to design modern, user-friendly UI experiences for your automation. So why choose apps? First and foremost, it's really easy. So through drag and drop and low-code capabilities, we see a lower overall complexity and cost associated with development. If you're already familiar with Studio and the UiPath platform, it's even easier. There is no need to learn a whole new programming language to create workflows. You can launch your existing Studio workflows from apps. In addition to that, mockups can be done by somebody who is less technical with drag and drop capabilities, and handoffs to developers are easy. The second main reason to use apps is to connect disjointed data through RPA and surface it in a single pane of glass. So it doesn't matter where your data is stored. If it's on the cloud, on premise, in a mainframe, same rules of RPA apply. We can pull this data from any of those systems, even with no API access. The third is that you can use apps to build anything from a very simple form, something like our polling app, to something a lot higher value, like the care management system that David is going to share later in the demo. Apps are fully customizable and can be tailored to your specific roles. So I've seen use cases where we may need different apps experiences, even for two different types of help desk employees, right? So there might be a level 1 and a level 2, and the types of automations or the information that they need to access might be different. And we're able to do that with apps. Lastly, you can publish an app with one click, enabling you to go live sooner. So a piece that I really want to double click on is the second point, where apps fits into your ecosystem, as well as where it fits into the overall platform. So we say that UiPath Apps starts where your software ends. We can unite disparate software stacks across your organization for any team, right? And you can use it to provide a single entry point for multiple systems or augment the functionality of your existing software. So I like this slide because it shows you both how UiPath Apps fits into your business, as well as how it fits into the UiPath ecosystem. On the business side, end users across your organizations can access apps from anywhere. This includes phones, tablets, PCs, VDIs, Macs. It doesn't matter as long as you can access a browser. And we can make apps for nearly anything. I've encountered so many IT administrators who are bogged down by requests for password resets. We can really easily solve this with an automation-powered app that lets you easily field all of these requests from one place. Or maybe you're looking for a more efficient onboarding process or a help desk ticketing solution. Just think about all the systems that you access every day to perform your job. And what if we could unify all the relevant data that you need from all of these different systems, surface it in one screen, as well as relevant automations, and make your job easier? So we can really solve endless problems with apps. From a technology side, apps works in harmony with our robots. So we can use unattended robots to cache information from your internal line systems of business, your mainframe systems, any types of software that you use, and capture that data into apps. You can also launch attended bots to capture data that you need in real time, and you can leverage queues. So something that we've actually built internally is an app that we use for conferences. So attendees put their name, their company, their email, and this information that gets sent into a queue, which we then process into a system. We can connect to any of your data sources, as I mentioned, and we also have an upcoming integration between Apps and Integration Service, which will enable robot-less integrations into systems with API access. So now that we understand how apps fit into the UiPath platform and your ecosystem, let's dive into a few ideas for different processes and business challenges that we can solve. So as mentioned previously, you can build a lot with apps. It can handle things from simple data entry and file management to more complex processes like HR onboarding and invoice processing. So I've highlighted here, bright orange, that the complexity that UiPath apps can handle really depends on the developer's experience. This is true for most software. The requirements of the application play a big role as well. But we've highlighted a few complex tasks that can be good candidates to look at for automation. So in HR, a few strong areas to look at are onboarding, benefits, and employee record management. In finance, we actually have a template in Marketplace for invoice processing that can work in harmony with our document understanding solution. We have payment processing and accounting reconciliation, as well as a couple of other areas to think about. For supply chain, think of areas like order management and inventory tracking. I know that inventory typically lives across multiple systems and it's really scattered. Shipping and receiving, so connecting to FedEx, UPS, any connectors that you need for that. And in customer service, support ticket management of any kind, right? So this can be IT ticket, customer complaint resolution, things of that sort. So you can see that the range of problems that we can solve with apps is really wide and varied. So think about what automated tasks could benefit from an interface that pulls in the relevant context that you need to make informed decisions. So that's always a good place to start thinking. Now, before I hand this off to Dave, who will walk you through his framework on how to turn these ideas into apps, I have some practical advice from our product team on other ways to think about using apps. So apps really enables you to allow users outside of your organization to interact with automation. So you all use the Poll app. Anybody who you want to interact with your automations can, as we saw earlier, interact with them. You can use it to provide cross-platform, cross-device access to your processes. So same with the Poll app, you could access it from your phone, or you could access it from your computer, wherever. Finally, you can use apps to ensure that your processes are getting valid input. So if you have any processes that require human input, say that you need to generate a report and you need to pass in a certain number of filters, you can use apps to ensure that the requirements and that the validations are in place for those inputs. So only the valid inputs will be accepted, reducing the risk of errors in your process. And finally, something that I always recommend to clients for more complex use cases, work with either a partner like Ashling or a professional services team. They have a wealth of knowledge and best practices that will immensely speed up your time to value and leave you with more resilient builds. So with that, I think that's a great transition for me to pass it on to David.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Silvana. Let me get my screen rolled up here. Yeah, so that was an awesome overview. Some really, excuse me, great advice. I'm already thinking about, so many interesting, cool little use cases that we can build with public apps. So things like vendor or customer login and order retrieval scenarios, getting information to the third parties that our businesses work with. I can never also get enough detailed component diagrams, so thank you for providing that as well. Just seeing how everything comes together is really enlightening. Thanks for the warm introduction. In case you didn't hear, my name is David Kroll. I'm a Director of Solutions Engineering at Ashling Partners. I'm actually based in Columbus, Ohio. I saw a few of you in chatter from there as well. And so I'm excited to join you all today. I've built a ton of low-code applications for companies over the years. Really just wanted to come out here and share my framework for getting a medium to high complexity applications built and out the door successfully. Sure, many of us have embraced UiPath apps for simpler scenarios, right? But how do we approach building more complex and sizable applications in UiPath? Do we need to change our approach? One thing that is great about using apps is that there are tried and true frameworks out there that can help guide you through the woods around how to get started. And really the best part is that you have a lot of freedom around how you approach building an app. That freedom can be a little intimidating at first, but if you follow the 5 steps in this app creation framework, it should really help your success rate and speed to delivery. So at a really high level, those stages, which I'm going to dig into a little bit more on subsequent slides here, are discovery, where we're going to be working closely with the business or the business user, the party that wants the app created or has the need to create the app, to really identify and understand their problem, and then document what it is that we want to create. A lot of times putting things on paper like that will help you identify issues before you go to build. Then we're going to go into a feasibility assessment. This is something Ashling Partners does with every client we work with. But here we take those requirements that you have and we compare them against what we believe we can do with the product and our level of development skills. Every developer is going to have different skills and capabilities. And so we want to ensure that not only is it feasible from a business and functional standpoint, but it's also feasible from a skill standpoint. And if it's not feasible from a skill standpoint, but it's feasible from a platform standpoint, maybe we need to work with another party. Wireframing is next up. In this situation, we're going to draw out, it's a lot of fun. I love wireframing, but we get to draw out the visual application interface and whiteboard what we would like it to look like and how we want it to be consumed and who we expect to use it. And then we pivot into technical design. So in technical design, I like to break it into front-end design and back-end design, which I'll talk about in just a little bit here. But here we really identify the front-end aspects of our application using some fun little rules that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And then back-end components as well to make sure that we're building our application on a solid foundation and not on quicksand. There are definitely wrong ways to build applications. And so we definitely want to make sure that we avoid those pitfalls wherever possible. And then lastly, we have the build stage. This is really where we're going to roll up our sleeves and use UiPath Apps Studio. We're going to get into data service. We're going to maybe go into Studio for some of the RPA components, the more complex processing needs. We're going to go and pull an RPA for that, and really just get all the goodies together to bring our application together and make it work. If you're in a larger shop or you have specific regulatory compliance and things like that, you'll definitely have a test and deploy and maybe to QA in a production environment and things like that. My personal style for when I'm building in my environment, just building out demonstrations and capabilities of what people can do, I typically follow these 5 stages. I don't have to deal as much with test and deploy. So that's why it's not in the framework. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit more about discovery. So I want to dig a little deeper into each step here. So every new application build should start from discovery, even if you are building the application for yourself and your own team. Take the time to step up and document what you need from your application. How technical you go in your discovery is totally up to you. It's also okay, not to be overly technical in your requirements and save that part for your technical design. So totally up to you how you approach that. But the most important part of discovery is making sure that you listen and learn from the people that want to have that new application created. And most importantly, that you truly understand the pain points and the problems that you are trying to solve with the application. This will help you tremendously when it comes time to do a proper user experience design. It's very easy to throw a lot of fields onto a form with a button to submit it into the system. It's very difficult well, I shouldn't say it's difficult. It just takes proper preparation and strategic execution to build a proper user experience that makes the application fun. So you're not actually boxing with the application, but you're able to go in and use it successfully. An application that people want to come back to and use because it makes their life easier. That's the type of application I think we should all be striving to build as developers. There's obviously a testing and deployment process, right, that comes in as well along that user experience design and making sure that that everything's right there. But we'll get into that as well later. When we think about discovery, people often say, well, how do you even start that? How do you start that process, right? And so what I like to do with our clients or the parties that I'm working with internally, I'll try to hold between 1 to 3 discovery sessions, depending on the scale of the application, before moving forward into assessing feasibility. And I like to go through, all of these questions. So, ask them, what is the purpose of your application? Yeah, that's not, a technical developer question, but it's really good for you to know when you're going out and building out the different components and setting up the interface. Who will be using the application? Is it just going to be one group? Is there a long-term plan to loop in more teams, more departments? You want to be aware of not just the short-term need, but where they want to take the application in the future. What are the key features and functionalities that are being requested? Sometimes they might not know, and they're just trying to see what they can achieve, and they're coming to you to pull a rabbit out of the hat and solve the problems that they're experiencing, and that's okay too. But we definitely want to ask if they maybe recently saw that there's a capability to integrate with SAP or a capability to integrate with some other backend system. We want to bring that forward and definitely want to talk about it. What's the desired timeline? This is important. If you embark on building your application and the timelines are off, people will be unhappy even if you're doing great work. So you want to make sure that you're all level set on the timelines. Are there any security or data privacy concerns? We see this especially in areas like healthcare, federal government, things like that, where they're highly regulated spaces. And we just have to be really, really careful with how we're transforming or providing or storing or caching that data between the different systems and applications that are being used in the solution. Are there any required integrations with backend systems or services? I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. What are the long-term goals? I mentioned that earlier as well, right? Are there any design or branding guidelines? This is a good one. Getting a copy of the company's branding style sheet is really, really helpful. It's helpful when you're trying to figure out what colors you're going to use so that you're not having to kind of be Picasso with a paintbrush. You can kind of go out there and lean on an existing brand, and people will typically accept an application that is branded like the organization that they work for. Their initial impression of that application is going to be higher because they're used to that branding, and it looks more professional, makes more sense to them. Does the application need to tie into existing RPA processes? So this is one of the beautiful things about apps, is if you build this amazing RPA process, you can actually call into that from apps. You can make subtle modifications to that RPA process to call into it from apps. Or do you need to build something completely new in RPA to support your app? I've done that as well. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll have rules and expressions for the simple to medium complexity stuff in my app. And then I'll lean on an RPA process to do a lot of the heavy lifting operations. If I'm going to go and call into AI or ML or anything like that, I'm going to be leaning into RPA to do that. What are the inputs and outputs of the app and the affected processes? So the inputs and outputs, that's specifically talking about data. What data are we bringing in? What data are we sending through to RPA? How is that data being surfaced on our application? We want to think through all that. We want to try to map out as much of that as possible. Probably won't be able to get it all, but still give it your best effort. That'll really help. What's the desired speed for processing? And of course, everyone's going to say instantaneous, but that's not the way the world works. There's going to be, scenarios where, especially if you're in peak seasonality or high volume situations, think the agriculture industry, right? Where, there's a seasonal spike in how much throughput the app needs to be able to handle before all of the goods that are being harvested can be shipped. In those scenarios, we have to plan for that. We have to get ahead of that, and we need to think through that. What's the expected frequency of use? That kind of speaks to the seasonality point, but also just, how many average users do we expect to be using this application? If you have an existing app that you're replacing with the UiPath app, maybe you can pull some data points there and see how people are using it. And then, are we replacing that existing application, right? Or are we building something new from scratch? It's really good to know what is our strategy, what is our approach here. You'll notice that a lot of these discovery questions, they're not super technical. They're not, they're intended to be high-level conversation starters, and each one of these is a loaded question. You can probably speak about each one of these for 15 to 20 minutes if you really want to. And then lastly, if you are replacing that existing application, it's very, very good to ask, what are the pain points in that current application? Because what you replace it with, you want to make sure you're alleviating or learning from and building upon someone else's attempt to do this in the past. All right, that was a pretty big list. So let's just keep it rolling here. So once technical discovery is complete, it's time to move forward. It's time to assess the feasibility. At this point, we know we have a need for an application. We have a great idea, but we need to make sure we can actually pull it off. And so what I like to do is go through all of my business and technical discovery questions and really map them around the key areas of the platform, of the UiPath platform. So essentially, you're mapping each requirement to one or more features within the UiPath suite. I like to document how I think my data will flow. It doesn't have to be overly specific, but again, you can go to the level of detail that you personally find helpful. One of the other UiPath Apps MVPs, Mason, he has like an incredible level of documentation. I've seen his stuff and it's just amazing. So if you see any sessions coming up for Mason, you'll definitely want to latch onto that. You do want to be careful here, because if you get too technical in your assessments, it can cause some issues down the road. If you make some technical assumptions and you really go in the weeds on it and something changes later on, you may have to refactor all that stuff that you did up front. So that's one of the reasons I try not to go too deep. But it's totally up to you and the level of risk that you're willing to accept there. it's most important to detail out the data flows between your app and any backend systems. Almost any app that's going to be highly useful in the workplace is going to have integrations into backend systems nowadays. I think that's a minimum expectation in this space. So, how you think it'll be used, by how many people, what systems do we need to integrate? Will it be an attended or an unattended scenario? And depending on how you plan on using the application, there can be it can be fully unattended, it can be fully attended, it can be a mix of both, to kind of handle high load scenarios and high data processing scenarios. Do we have enough licenses to pull it off? That type of thing. From there, we want to dig into those features that are being requested and think about whether we're going to use rules or expressions in our app to handle them. So, maybe we want to use RPA to do the heavy lifting. So as I mentioned earlier, rules and expressions, great option for the simple to medium complexity stuff. But when you really need to maybe write a little code, if you're going to do that, I highly recommend using, our trusted robots to handle any of those complex operations. And if you get stuck here, that's okay. This is a step that levels up depending on your level of experience with the platform. So, if you're struggling with this, you don't kind of know what the full breadth and capability of the platform is, you don't want to make the wrong decision, just consider reaching out to folks like me over at Ashling. We do have a lot of experience identifying and assessing that feasibility. That's the last I'll say about Ashling here. So one of the things I like to do is kind of divide up those complex requirements, especially if I'm working on a project with multiple developers. I like to divide up the complex requirements by developer and have each person kind of research how they will go about achieving it. That's a great time to bring in your development team before they're actually building them. It's a great way to educate them, let them know what's coming before they're being asked to build it. A lot of times developers, they just love to get ahead on the research and the analysis to make sure they know how to do that job when it comes to them and they need to deliver. So next up is our wireframe. And this is actually my favorite part of the process, even more so than the build. Wireframing is so important because it shows your end users and your stakeholders what they can visually expect to see when your app is completed. So it's extremely important to take the time drawing out the application, detailing how it will interact with the user. This helps you set expectations with key stakeholders before you spend weeks putting together an application. You know that they've essentially signed off on the design and you're not worried when you go and show that to them after the build. Most of the time, when I think about the last 15 years of app building I've done, most of the time when the business is upset with an application, it's because the team didn't do this step. They assumed the business would just like whatever design they envisioned. Don't be that developer. Don't assume. Give the business multiple options, especially if it's a big project. Give the business multiple options. Let them pick their path. I know this can take a little bit more work up front, but it is something that can really set you apart from the rest. On some, really large projects, as I mentioned, it's not uncommon for us to build multiple interface wireframes based on user feedback and really let the business and technical stakeholders pick their preferred design. Kind of think of these back to the books that we used to read as children, pick your adventure. It's kind of the same philosophy, right, of giving them a little bit of control over what they're receiving. And it can often stop a lot of those complaints that might come up later on in the process if they don't feel engaged. I'm a huge fan of wireframing, not just the new applications, but every change request and update that gets requested to that application. It really helps me as a developer think through what I'm building and how to build it. So I think it benefits all parties involved. And just to kind of show you what an example wireframe might look like, I personally use a tool called Belsonic. There's a lot of other tools out there. I've just always used Belsonic. I think I've been using it for like 10 years now. But as you can see, it's rather basic, right? It's like whiteboarding, but it really breaks down your interface and allows you to leave notes and comments about different sets of capabilities that you're looking to achieve. So especially helpful when it comes to interface design. Interface design is different than just building an app that meets business requirements. When you're building an interface, you're thinking about all the different areas where your application is going to load contextual information. How am I going to show navigation? How is a user going to get back to where they came before? how are they going to walk through the experience of using the application? So whiteboarding that interface is just really helpful for maintaining sanity, keeping consistency throughout your application, and more on that in just a moment. So I absolutely love bringing up the CRAP rule when it comes to front-end design, because it's the framework for, in my opinion, a modern application design. So CRAP is an acronym. It refers to contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. So contrast really refers to the use of elements that are noticeably different from one another to draw a user's focus to a specific aspect of the design. It involves creating a stark difference between elements that are placed close to each other or in close proximity. So in essence, contrast is really about making certain elements stand out and be more noticeable. You think about the apps that you use on your phone, the apps that you have the best experience with, that you just love to use, they're all going to follow the CRAP rules. Not to say that they're crappy applications. The R is for repetition. Repetition is a technique for maintaining consistency in your design. So by repeating elements, users become naturally familiar with the way the information is presented to them. So for example, a bullet list makes use of repeated circular symbols to display information. So we all have an easier time reading bulleted lists. That's just how it works for our brains. This repetition of symbols makes it easier for us to scan and comprehend the information. And we want people to be able to comprehend our applications. Next is the alignment. And alignment is really the principle that governs the placement of the elements in a design. It really ensures that the information is organized in an orderly manner with no elements randomly placed. Nobody likes to see a random button in the top right when they don't expect it, right? I think we've all worked with Frankenstein interfaces, maybe in systems that don't follow these principles, and it's just really hard to use them. So always think through that, always think through your alignment. Create that visual connection between elements. And I'm going to show some examples of this. Don't worry, I'm not just preaching it. I'm going to show you some follow through on this. But in other words here, alignment really provides structure for arranging the elements in the design, making sure that each element has a clear and defined position relative to the others, and that it makes sense when you look at it. And then the P is for proximity. So proximity is a principle that essentially holds that elements that are created, I'm sorry, not created, that's the wrong word. Elements that are related to each other should be positioned close together and vice versa. So by applying this principle, especially in web design, the user experience can be greatly improved. An example of this might be if you're on an order form, you have all your order information on the left. If you were to put all of the action items for that order on the far right-hand side of your screen, you're breaking the proximity rule. You need to pull those buttons forward and put that next to the order information. I shouldn't have to look from one side of the screen to the other. So getting into some UX principles here from the design and the front end, but really important if you're trying to build a really strong, modern, professional application. Okay, so that's for laying out your interface, but what about coloring? The 60-30-10 color rule is one of my favorite design principles. So this really refers to the optimal distribution of color in graphic design. So according to that rule, 60% of the space should be dominated by a dominant color, 30% by a secondary color, and the remaining 10% by an accent or call to action color. The purpose of this rule is to provide a simple and effective way to achieve a balanced color palette and really bring some harmonious look into your design. It's art, honestly. And so the 60-30-10 rule can be applied to any design project, whether it's a website, it could be a room in your house, it could be marketing material. It all helps to create a sense of visual interest and stability. We also want to think through, of course, not just the front end stuff. You can tell I have a passion for UX design in addition to the development work, but we also have to think through our back end design as well, right? And make sure that aligns with all the front end rules that we're creating. So, it's important to think through your relational data, the RPA processes that you want to call, the input and the output arguments to make sure you understand how data will be stored and retrieved and how complex operations will execute, how data will flow through your application while it runs. It's a great stage to think about scalability, how existing licenses will be applied, making sure the application will work for all end users. Great time to do that. All right, so it's easy to say all that and talk about it with words, but what do I actually mean by using philosophies like CRAP and 60-30-10? So let's take a look at a UiPath app that I put together. I actually built this about a year ago. It's called Emerald. It's just a little tour of UiPath Apps capabilities. And so I'm just going to pause for a moment. This is just a screenshot, but I just want to pause for a moment and look at the design. So you can see I have a strong background color of black here on the background. That's my 60%, right? I have this light shade of gray, right, for my primary interface. That's going to make my application layout come forward. This is more of like a dark theme, right? And then I have some highlight colors to emphasize key areas where you can click. It's important to note with the 60-30-10, you don't need to only have 3 colors. You can have more than 3. You just want to be really sparing and tactical about how you use those. So you can see very clearly that I know where I can click within this application. And if we think about it, right, if we go back to the different rules around this, right, we have the contrast. We're creating that contrast on each one of these sections, like style and formatting. You can see the contrast on the try button. That's making that button call forward to me and know that I can click it, right? There's the repetition of elements. I wanted to dive across every major feature of apps with this tour. To do that, I decided to structure out repetitive sections and essentially format it like a table to surface all that information. For alignment, everything's lined up. It's pixel perfect. There's or for the most part anyway. I don't think I've checked recently, but it should be pixel perfect. But essentially everything's lined up. Everything's margined out. It's spaced correctly. It's easy to read. It's not super condensed. At least I've been told it's easy to read. I probably shouldn't claim that. That's another thing. You should never make assumptions about your app and how it's being perceived. But then proximity as well. We're grouping different sections together. So if you're looking at styles and formatting, you read the description of styles and formatting, here's what I can do with styles and formatting. That's the proximity rule in a nutshell. All right, so I'm going to move forward here. So lastly, it's time for our build. And here we really break the functionality out into different sprint themes. So if I like to do things agile. There are different modes of operation for sure, but either way, you're breaking the functionality out into a segment. You could have a theme for the landing page, the login components, the product management components, maybe if you're building like a vendor or product application. We'll want to pre-build any interface pages as blank templates in case we need to build more of them in the future. So essentially what this means is I can build out the layout. It's almost like you're building out a Word template, right? You have the different sections where you want to populate. You can just say, section header, so on and so forth, and you can save that and copy it and reuse it for every page that's going to be built with that design. That's something that's going to save you so much time, especially when you roll up your sleeves and put a lot of effort into getting a strong UX design out the door. This is going to be really helpful for contextual sections. If you have a menu and you're clicking the menu items and you're loading a screen in that's different for each one of those menu items, but you want that to be consistent, right? Again, consistency, right? So in that scenario, you're going to want to be going through and doing that. Pop-ups and modals, also great category for reusable interface design as well. You don't want to be rebuilding every pop-up that you create within your application, right? And finally, this is just maybe a pro tip I wish had been told to me when I first started using apps, but I like to create a little debug window. It's something it's just a little pane at the bottom of my app that is something that I can hide or show while debugging that screen of my application. I can put all of my variable values on it, and that lets me save hours of time when I'm testing and debugging and trying to figure out, which rules I have to configure and trying to get everything to work just right. Instead of trying to, just go through different test scenarios to pull that off, it's just very helpful to kind of build out the little debugging pane for yourself. With any large or complex applications, I really recommend one bite at a time. Don't try to eat the whole cookie. Don't try to put it in all at once, right? Go one bite at a time. Don't boil the ocean. Make sure you test each feature that you're building successfully before moving on to the next component. you can build a disaster for yourself if you go out and you build, in your opinion, the entire working application, and then you go and try to test it. I feel sorry for the developer that works like that. That would be a very, very painful way to go about your week. So as you build each component, test, try, learn, educate, make improvements, make it faster. And then the one thing I would also say is, if you have a perfectionist personality where you're trying to make everything perfect and line up just right, take that down a notch. That's something I struggle with. I struggle with getting apps out the door quickly because I would try to make everything absolutely perfect, and you don't need to do that every time. They often say perfection is the enemy of good, and I truly live that. So don't be afraid to just say, yeah, this is good enough to move forward. All right, so once we come out of the build cycle, we have our hopefully our minimum viable product. So now I want to walk you through an app that's designed with those same philosophies I was just talking about. It's called Coordinated Care Assessment. This is designed to help healthcare payers and providers connect their patients and members to better care. We designed this UiPath app last year. We successfully delivered it. We're on a project to continue making that better. This makes RNs interactions, RNs being nurses, makes their interactions with patients and members more human, while performing historically rigid and unfun healthcare assessments. If anyone's ever been through a healthcare assessment, I'm sure many of you have, it's usually not a very fun process. It's very, very boring, usually done over a series of calls. It can be very painful. The impact of not doing that correctly or people not participating in that can literally be the loss of life, right? And lower quality healthcare, which is going to result in stresses to the healthcare systems. For folks that aren't guided on how to avoid diabetes, right? For example, in diabetes, we know the impact that has in that space. So it's crazy to think about how all that comes together and how that can actually be improved and made better through UX, but it can. It makes the experience, easier to perform, more natural to the parties on the phone. It helps keep people on the line, and the longer they stay on the line, the better care they get. So this app, it leans on data service, it leans on expressions, it leans on RPA, and of course, it's built from the ground up on apps. It was a hit with our nurses because we had a consistent, strong communication aligned with a business outcome. This was absolutely key. We delivered on their wish list of top 5 features that they wanted to have, and I'll walk through some of those features. And it plays into the platform's strengths. We leaned on apps because it had such strong visual flexibility. The container framework, it might seem a little daunting when you realize how you have to structure the containers out. But once you get a knack for it, you can put anything anywhere on your app. It's really, really flexible. We leaned on RPA for pure functional power when we really needed to go and roll up our sleeves and do the heavy lifting. In this case, we were taking all the information out of one of their backend systems, surfacing it on the app, allowing them to modify and change it and push that back into the system that they didn't like using because it was too difficult. So we essentially removed that from having to be dealt with on a daily basis for the nurses, and they loved that. And then it leans on data service for data in this particular example. In the one we built in the real world, we worked with more specific databases and applications because we had to follow HIPAA compliance. But for this particular demonstration, we leaned on data service. All right, so let me go ahead and bring my app up. All right, so here we go. We're looking at the coordinated care assessment. So I'm going to walk you through this really quickly here. So essentially what you have in this scenario is you have a nurse who's on the phone with a patient or an insurance member, right? And they're going to need to go through a series of steps to evaluate and manage their care. So one of the things that they really wanted was, okay, let's kind of create an app for this, right? Where I can go in and I can put in the member ID, right? That's going to enable the button here that allows me to fetch the member ID out of the system. So my RPA is running right now to pull that information out and bring it forward into my application. So there we go. So we've got Sam Darrell Smith here. We can pull forward some of his information. And we can, of course, if we want to, we can change the member ID and pull a different person if maybe we mistyped it. But we're going to go ahead and say, you know what, we're going to select Sam and associate him to this request. So in this case, we're selecting the member, and what this is doing is configuring everything behind the scenes to associate Sam to this particular request. So you can see, okay, Sam's now been selected, and we're going to enable some additional options here. So maybe we want to reach out and call them. We can configure RPA to go out and make that call for us. Maybe we want to send a text message. That can be as simple as a Twilio integration. View activity history, we'll go ahead and click on that. That's going to bring forward the information on where we've interacted with Sam in the past. So maybe he's had a PCP appointment. We've reminded him with an automated call or some automated SMS texting. This is when that information went out. So think about yourself as being a nurse, someone that's trying to keep track of. You can say when you're on the phone, oh, I see we sent you a reminder out here. Did you have a chance to follow up with that? Things like that. So again, once we go forward here, I'm going to go ahead and show you the next big feature request that came from the nurses, which was they said, look, we're going through a lot of different fields with a lot of different people. We need an ability to track our progress as we're going through this. So what happens here is when we make our save, it's actually going to calculate the progress on all the remaining stages. Now for the demo today, because I knew I wasn't going to have a ton of time, we only have the first 5 sections being calculated. The back 5 have hundreds of fields. But I want to show you there at the top, we've got that navigation bar, and you can notice that it shows the start and outreach is showing as 100% complete. All these other sections that we're about to go through, and we can go through them in any order, by the way, because I'm going to be on the phone with a member, and they can be naturally having a conversation. Something can come up right after I'm talking to the member, where we jump from here all the way to medications. So we need to make sure that we support that we provide that capability. Right? So I can come in, I can fill out my information, whether it's a dynamic hide or show that I want to do. I may fill out a few things, and just to not make a fool of myself here, I'm just going to use Latin because I'm not a medical healthcare expert. So I'm going to go in here and fill out some of these stages, but I'll leave this one blank, right? For example, right? And maybe I want to view the medication list, make adjustments to that. That can all happen while we're on the phone, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and save my changes now, and you'll notice the progress indicator gets updated at the top. And so what this allows the RN to do is, as they're on the phone and they're chaotically trying to get all these fields filled out, right? It allows them to go, oh, shoot, you know what? I missed that field at the bottom. Let me go ahead and fill that out real quick. And you know what? I'm just going to hop on over. I don't even need to click save. I'm just going to go ahead and fill out some of these other sections for transition work. Maybe we'll jump over here to healthcare, current health status, right? So we're going to go ahead and, we're going to go ahead and fill out some of these. Let's go ahead and say diabetes. We'll go ahead and add other here and go forward and fill out all these different fields. So this is really just handling, all your common healthcare medical questions that you would typically see. All right, so now I'm on the phone. I click the save button. I say, okay, well, what else do I have to do on this call? Let's wait to see what it tells us. And I can really lean on the application to help guide me through the process. And there we go. So we can see boom, boom, boom. Okay, I've got these 4. So now all I have to do is this communication preference section. Let's go ahead and set that to text message. If we say decline for other reason, let's show this other field. Let's fill that out, and let's complete this let's go ahead and complete this assessment. So you can kind of see how that interface comes together, how we built it in apps, how we're kind of tracking the progress and capturing the different fields across the different stages. But also, we have that menu on the right, in case we need to go out and do more specific things. So maybe as a part of my conversation, I realized we need to schedule a PCP appointment, right? So I can naturally fetch the PCP provider for this member or patient. If I need to make a change, I can, of course, go in there and do that. But maybe, I need to schedule this person for a COVID vaccination, right? Or just any vaccination, right? Maybe it's just a flu vaccine. So I can actually go through and I can request that PCP follow-up. I can do that all from within the app. I don't have to leave. I don't have to go to another place. I don't have to go to another system. RPA brings it all together in the central interface. So that's really what we achieved through this care management application. And now, just to close out this demo, I'm going to click on summary and finish. I'm going to check these 3 boxes and go ahead and submit that into the system. But before I do that, I want to show you just how this data is being stored currently. You can store the data wherever you want. It doesn't have to be like the way I'm about to show you. Some people stored in a database, others in data service. In this particular example, they were telling me they wanted to build out a spreadsheet with some of this information. Not all of it, but in this particular case, you can see that I've got my Excel file here, and it's storing all the information that we've been capturing across these different tabs. So what was that? Sorry, the current health status is CHS, communication preferences, transitions, medications, so on and so forth, right? So we've got that captured, which is great. So I'm going to go ahead, save those changes and submit, and we should be good. All right. And so what's happened here is it's moved that file from my input into my output folder. And so we can hand that off to a robot to do all the necessary things it needs to do to enter that into the next backend system. And if we want to start over, we can say, oh, let's perform another assessment and pick up right where we left off with a fresh new memory. All right. So that concludes the demo portion. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed building it, and it was a lot of fun. So let me know if you have any questions. And I'm trying to catch up a little bit here, so I might need a little help from the UiPath team around what to go into.
Thank you, David.
So David, a quick question on the chat. Where is the care management app pulling the data from?
Where is the care management app where from, sorry?
Pulling the data from?
Yes, so there was a backend system. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was called Care Advance, but it was a rigid, structured healthcare system, and they wanted to pull the data out of it and then put data back into it using our app. They just wanted to use the app to make it a little bit easier to work with that information, but that is where it was fetching the data from. I saw a question there about asking about APIs. We tried to go into the Care Advance API, and they actually told us they weren't going to let us do that. It wasn't because it was a technical limitation, it was because the provider wasn't too happy we were doing it. But we found a way around that anyway by using RPA and fetching up the data in a picture-in-picture execution. So we were able to get around that anyway. We can do both is the point.
David, a quick question for you regarding the debug panel that you said you built.
Yeah.
Do you have a brief demonstration of that?
That's a great question, Justin. The environment that I had that in, I actually don't have that available to me currently, but that might be something I create a post on in the UiPath community, and I'll track your name, Justin. I'll see if I can tag you to it when I get that out the door, so you can see an example of that.
Thanks so much.
David, really quick. I mean, great presentation. Can you just quickly talk about the architecture in the background, right? Like, so what are the different components that you're using? I mean, from the UI perspective, it looks awesome, but in the background, how did you stitch it all together? Can you quickly talk about that?
Definitely a team effort. Definitely a lot of strong, capable infrastructure architects, solutions architects that helped guide me down the right path. I am the first to admit that I'm not as strong, especially on the infrastructure side of the house, especially when you start looking across these highly complex healthcare scenarios. So it was a team effort to get that done. I'll answer that question to the best of my ability, which is, we really leaned on RPA, which was structured through unattended and attended scenarios. So we had unattended bots that were picking up these requests as they were submitted in. So when I hit that save and finish, that went to a queue for an unattended bot to pick up and enter into the backend system. We had attended robots that would fetch and bring the data forward into the application or interact with the data when it was needed, whenever we needed to pull the latest information out of that backend system. So we had unattended, we had attended. That was set up through apps, which we had apps deployed. In our case, we have a dev environment and a production environment with this particular client. But we do everything in dev, set it all up, get it working. It is built on the automation suite. So we have automation suite installed at this particular client with apps, with data service, Trying to think if there's anything else there that I'm not thinking about, but it was built fundamentally on automation suite architecture. So I hope that answers it. But if you have a more specific question, just let me know.
No, that definitely helps, David. But would it be right to say there were like multiple licenses in the background that were required to get this to this state, because there could be multiple people simultaneously accessing the app?
Yeah, what we decided on to guide our clients through this was we said essentially that for every primary user of the application that we assume an attended license for that person, and we went up front with that. There are ways to not have attended robots interact with apps, but you're not going to have the same level of capabilities and ability within the app if you don't do it. So just every time we are interacting with a client, we're building an app for them, we highly recommend doing the attended license for each end user that's using the application. Now, my understanding is that you can have a bucket of those licenses, and that's why seasonality and usage is so important to analyze, because you can distribute those licenses to a group of users depending on, you don't have to license each individual user. I think there's a capability there to create a bucket and then dynamically allocate those as they're being used, if I'm not mistaken. But the UiPath team can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Hi, this is Andy. How are you, David?
Hi, Andy.
I just wanted to ask a question on given the sensitivity of this application being healthcare. How did you manage authentication and authorization? Because we really, as far as I know, as of now, to my knowledge, we really do not have a way to authorize through a username and password. How did we manage that?
So this was the primary reason they selected Automation Suite. That allowed them to run it in their own private cloud. So the IT team at this particular healthcare insurance provider, they wanted full control over everything.
Okay, so
data was being stored. That's how they handled that.
So VPN access, and then you get access
correct.
to the internal URL. Okay.
Correct.
That's something that would be nice to have for public-facing apps. I think something to authenticate against if you really do not have full control. As if we are deploying this application to public cloud, I've always had that problem. But thanks for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in 23.10, Andy, we are planning to bring some authentication mechanism for public-facing apps. So it will help in scenarios like what you mentioned. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Venkata. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, and there was another question in here from Eric. How do you handle the source code? There are multiple developers involved. Is there an option to merge the work? So I will speak to this as I work more on the design side than the pure development side. I can talk with the team and see how they went about doing that and get back to you. I don't want to misspeak there or give you the wrong answer, but my understanding is they divided the team up into an apps developer, an RPA developer, and like architecture. And those three teams kind of own their respective sections. This app wasn't so large that they needed a team of 20 developers. They only needed about a team of about 5. So it wasn't a situation where you're dealing with TFS scenarios and things like that, trying to merge code branches and things like that. The RPA components, which are the most complex and going to have the most code tied to them, those can all leverage the existing RPA capabilities, the existing UiPath capabilities to integrate with source code management tooling.
Okay, I think we are getting close to the end. We can take one more question if there is any for David. If not, we will wrap it.
Hello, David. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I wanted to know, like, on the RPA side, did they leverage the orchestrator APIs at any one point, like for triggering the unattended bots via an endpoint, something like that, using orchestrator APIs? I want to know.
That's a great question. Sorry, I saw that one in the chat and I meant to answer it. Yeah. So apps naturally has just a rule to add a queue item. Okay. You don't even need to integrate with the API to do that. However, if you do need to integrate with an API, super easy to do. You just need to configure an RPA process. So you would say, I want to start an RPA process, And within that RPA process, you would call whatever API you needed. So that would be the way you would fundamentally get around that.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I just shared in the chat the upcoming links for the upcoming sessions we will hold in March and April for the Deep Dive series. We thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Silvana. Thank you, David. Definitely great speakers today, and the session was amazing. I mean, you could tell from the chat and the interaction we had in the chat, and Joe and Venkata helped a lot. So thank you to all of our colleagues for the support also. Do not forget to register for the upcoming sessions in Deep Dives. You will see them here, but you have the links already in the chat, so you can take them from here. Also, you can go to community.uipath.com and check out the whole landing page for the series. Thank you, everyone, once more, and we'll close it today. We will update with any details on the landing page of the event, and you will receive the recording and the deck for this event tomorrow on email with all the details there. And hopefully you will find that useful. I know many of you asked for it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Silvana. Thank you,
Thank
David.
you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Great presentation.
Bye.